Today we're talking all about legal conversions. Welcome back, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us again this week. It is an absolute pleasure to have you tuning in. This week I have a super special guest, John Tenbrinke from Blackjack Contracting. He is the president and CEO. He himself has been involved in over 250 of these legal unit conversions all over Hamilton, Ontario, but today we're going to focus specifically on Hamilton, Ontario. So before we go ahead and dive into it, I want to direct your attention to the link in the description below. If you want to get a hold of me because you're looking to buy a conversion, sell a conversion, or you just want some more questions about it and you want to reach out to John, you can click the link below to reach out to me. I'm also going to leave John's information in the description below so you can reach out to him directly with any questions you may have related to this. So, John, thank you so much for joining us.
It's an absolute pleasure, my friend.
I like it. So we've known each other for a few years, and
Yes,
I
sir.
got excited when you got into these things because a lot of people don't fully understand what it is. So it's nice to know somebody that specializes in this field. Could you maybe break down the difference between doing a legal accessory unit in the basement versus doing an actual duplex conversion in Hamilton?
Yeah, so in Hamilton, it's pretty much the same thing. So there's a lot of different bylaws and different zones if you go city by city. Now, fortunately, because of the new Doug Ford rules, it's becoming a lot more simpler and clear. But basically, before, you could do an in-law suite where it really weren't separating everything the way we are. When we're doing a conversion, we're literally building a new house inside of a house. So there's a lot of challenges when it comes to sound and fireproofing, which are the main ones. Obviously, we want these things safe because people's lives are at stake. So the a lot of the money and a lot of the effort goes into making sure that they're completely fire separated and completely sound separated. So, and the difference between an in-law suite and all that is really it's you're not doing a lot of that stuff. Now, sometimes in in-law suites they weren't allowing, secondary stoves and secondary cooking appliances, heat sources, that kind of thing. The sound and fire separations weren't the same. But for the point of this conversation, you're basically building another house inside of a house.
Okay, and then I know you mentioned the Doug Ford specifically. I think it was what, a couple years ago or 3 years ago they started allowing this, so to kind of override municipality control.
Yeah, so it's been changing. I mean, we started doing this in 2017, and at the time it was new. So there was not a lot of people understood how to do them. The rules were different all over the map. They had no real way of controlling these things. Some cities were brutal to do them, some people were super easy. And over the years, it's become more and more popular where now you see them doing all the time. In the last 6 months to a year, the Ontario government announced that they were going to overrule the municipality bylaws to allow, multiple units on a property. And now in Hamilton, it's up to four. Some cities it's three, but before they had the right to choose not to accept these things, and that's pretty much going by the wayside, which is great news when it comes to being able to for investors and for the general public for the housing crisis and being able to create units. So I'm hoping for the best, and we're hoping that they've made this a lot less bureaucratic to get done, because sometimes it was an absolute gong show to get any of this, or sometimes it just wasn't allowed whatsoever, which really promotes doing things illegally, which we see all the time, right? So at least by making this thing where the cities can no longer refuse. It's going to be great long term between adding the basement suites, doing triplexes, or even now adding the coach houses to the property. So there's some exciting times coming ahead.
Yeah, you really touched on a good point there about people would just go ahead and do it illegally because I felt like to do a duplex back in the day in Hamilton, it was really just a specialized set of people that could do it, like that understood the process, how to go through it. But now they've kind of simplified it that anybody can kind of go in and do this, obviously with the assistance of a contractor, engineers, and all that. But it's a lot more
Yeah,
accessible, in my opinion, than the typical duplexing process of the past.
it definitely is. It
Yeah.
definitely is.
So let's kick off the bat. If somebody's looking to purchase one of these, they want to do the conversion, or they're thinking of even doing it in their own basement. What are some mandatory things that they can look at to check sort of the boxes that yes, I can do this, or no, I can't?
Okay. So again, this is very area specific, some of the bylaws and codes. So Hamilton, fortunately for us, runs off the national building code compared to the provincial building code, which what the big difference is a height requirement. So throughout the rest of the province, the minimum height restrictions at the lowest point underneath bulkheads, beams, doorways, all that kind of stuff was in everywhere else is 6'4" and 7/8. So you might as well call it 6'5". Hamilton has allowed 6'1". So, we're dealing with a lot of wartime homes, a lot of older homes. So ceiling height was never, basements were never meant to be finished when they designed these houses. So they allow 6'1", which gives a lot more access to be able to do these properties, and that's really not a non-negotiable one. Obviously, you need some way of getting into the property, so a second entrance, that's very important. And natural light is a big consideration when creating a legal suite because there is natural light requirements, so it does not feel like you live in a dungeon. So for on a there's two ways to look at it, and it's a little bit technical. But Part 9 of the building code, which is how we build everything for new construction, and then there's Part 11, which is basically a cheat code to allow these conversions to happen, and that's for houses that are 5 years and older. But a lot of these older houses, the basements didn't have windows, and there's either restrictions on the side of the house or there's deck obstructions. Well, that's not negotiable. You have to be able to get a certain amount of light in. So for all the older homes, it's 5% natural light in the living room and 2.5% in the bedroom. And obviously, we need egress window, which is a single operating window that's 3.8 square feet, so a guy my size can get out without any issues. Those are non-negotiables. Um, so those are really the high level basic ones. Now, up until recently, there was a really strict parking situation in Hamilton, which they have relaxed drastically. In the downtown core, there was no parking requirements. In some areas, you needed one spot per unit, and you had to be wide. So you have to be able to park side by side. Well, that's a big issue in Hamilton and really tight neighborhoods, which prevented a lot of houses from being able to be legally duplex. So they've relaxed that rule now to where it's one spot total, and if you're in certain spots, you don't have to have it at all. It's hard for me to tell you in a 20-minute podcast how the neighborhoods are. So my quick advice before we get off topic is before you purchase a home, you really want to work with a real estate agent that understands the area you're working in. And you want to have a couple people on your power team, such as a BCIN designer, which are the building code guys, that you can make a quick phone call to do a quick check. That's the biggest thing you can do. I've seen that mistake happen hundreds of times where people end up having a bad deal over it. But in the good news is that it's all becoming easier every day.
Yeah, that's good. The parking one I remember was a big issue because I think at one point they even switched it to tandem was allowed, but now
Short
I
term.
guess tandem is allowed now anyways, right?
Tandem
Or
is not
yeah.
allowed now.
Okay.
Now, here's the thing you got to consider as an investor or a property owner too is that tandem is great for getting your permits, but you have to have people that live there, and the tenants that live there are they going to cooperate so one person can park in front of the other? So something to consider on the back end for your own sake that you don't get a call every night. But that's basically how the easiest way you're going to get your building permit.
Yeah, I could definitely see that causing a lot of headaches. I know when me and Cassandra are looking at doing these ourselves, we've been looking for stuff that preferably isn't tandem because we don't want to be dealing with the headaches of people blocking people in and that sort of stuff. So that's a really good point that you brought up there. Talking about the process, like what would you, is there possible to break down kind of an overview of the start to finish process for one of these legal basement conversions?
Sure, they pretty much are all the same now. It all depends whether you own the property or you've just purchased the property. But for my experience, I dealt with mostly people that just bought the property, so I'm gonna do that one first. Typically, if you have a contractor on your team and you have a BCIM on your team, you're going to make the calls before you make the offer. Now, if you can have your contractor come around with you on houses that you're serious, don't waste their time, obviously, but if you have a house you're serious about and he can come with you, it's basically just as good as doing a home inspection. I never really, I'm always a big advocate for home inspections on single family homes, but on a house that you're going to be doing a conversion is a lot of the issues that you're going to run into are going to be dealt with during that duplex anyways because you're rebuilding a lot of so much stuff. But so it's great if you could have a contractor come with you to see the house before you make a firm offer. I know times have changed now because last year, the year before, good luck putting a home inspection clause in your deal, right? That's just not happening. But now that's kind of changing, where it's a lot easier to get that in the contract. So that's always a great thing to have if you didn't have a contractor on site. Let's just assume that all went well. You bought the property. Usually you get a certain amount of visits before your closing. Try to get as many as possible for certain reasons. But the first one you want to do immediately after you firmed up the deal is you want to get a appointment with your BCIN, which is a building code identification number. I don't know why they call it that, but that's what we call them, BCINs. They're basically the architects for the project. They're going to do all the drawings, all the permitting work on your behalf. You can do it yourself. It is a gong show. Don't. It's not worth it. Now, on average, a BCIN will cost about $5,000 for all the work they're going to do. Plus, when you budget that, make sure you're budgeting for the permit fees. In my experience, for the last couple of years, permitting fees usually run between $1,500 and $2,000 in a normal circumstance. So you're looking at $7,000 plus before you break into construction. And then what happens is they come and they draw the property, they measure it, and what they're going to do is they're going to produce a couple concept drawings for you for designs that are going to work by code and functionality. Once you're going to review them, approve them, and they're going to create a permit set of drawings. And that's where your contractors are going to quote off of. Here's my quick tidbit is if you walk through an appointment. Now, I've done so many of them that I could do it. Okay, but we don't want to go off my advice, off my example there is I could walk into a property right now and tell you pretty much how much it's going to cost because I have the experience to do so. Not everybody does, and it's not the smart thing to do. The smart thing to do is get your numbers based off those permit drawings, and they have to see the site. So if you get a contract, you send them those drawings, and he gives you a price, that's not the price. They have to physically set their eyes on the property because there are situations and things that they need to see that's going to cost money. Let's assume now you've done the drawings, you've done the project, you've got your quotes from the contractors, that's great. And the city, you've submitted those drawings to the city for permitting. Hamilton is typically slow on the paperwork part. It's the longest part of the process when it comes to dealing with the city about these duplex conversions. Once you get into the job and you have your permits, they're actually really great to deal with. But the point of the matter is that takes 4 to 6 weeks to get your permits. The legal answer is they have 10 days to review your submission and to make feedback. And if there's any feedback, whatever, the time limit's off. It takes as long as it takes. So do plan on that. So that's why we want to start everything as soon as possible in the process. Once you get on closing day, I probably shouldn't say a lot of this stuff, but what we always did is we went in on closing day and we demoed and we started doing a lot of the prep work. Is that the legal answer? No, it's not. Am I supposed to be telling you the different answer? Yes, I am, but this is the truth. The point of the matter is we always started demoing, we always started doing all the prep work ahead of time so we didn't waste time because typically construction on a secondary suite is 3 to 4 months depending on the complexity and whether you're going to do some main floor renovations, blah blah blah. The only one of the aspects of these projects that is not controlled by the city is the electrical. The electrical is a completely separate governing body, and the city, if city tries to stop you for any reason whatsoever, they cannot stop the electrical. They have no jurisdiction, and if they try to tell you, they're wrong. So I'm also a master electrician with an electrical company, so I can say this legally. Um, but so basically, once we start to, usually by the time we get to the framing on a job like that, the permits are in, and then you're off to the races. It's a very systematic approach to do these things well. I don't probably have time on this podcast to tell you the whole thing, but basically at this point, you're going to go into basically 5 stages of the project. You're going to demo, frame, fire separation. Fire separation is done in 2 parts. You actually need to install fire separation while you frame. There's certain things you got to do that takes experience. So if you think you're going to do these yourself, you're going to want someone with experience to get you through that part because you will not do that right the first time. We didn't do it right the first time. I know lots of people that screw that up the first time and I'm having to rip apart and do it. So that'll save you a lot of effort if you bring someone who can walk you through that process. Once you install that, then all the trades are coming in. And this is typically the longest and the most expensive part of the project. These houses that typically we're going to convert to duplexes are usually old, and usually the mechanicals, plumbing, HVAC, electrical are in old shape, and this is the time to do it. Biggest piece of advice I give you, this is not the time to cheap out or try to skimp out. This stuff is the most expensive for a reason, and it's the most important for a reason, and this is the stuff that breaks the most often. So if you try to skip out on it now, after you go and finish this beautiful place and have to tear it out, you'll be really upset. So don't do that. Once all the trades are installed, we're going to do a series of inspections. Then we're going to insulate, and there's going to be another inspection. Now, insulation is where we install the sound separation. So we actually do more work on the sound separation aspect of these projects than we do on fire separation. If you look at the way the code is set up on Part 11, most of the work we're doing is for sound separation. On a advice for landlord situation, this is the part where put a little extra into, because no, you'll have the biggest issues you're going to have, especially if you're doing an up and down duplex, is noise. You'll lose a lot of tenants that way if the noise is not done right. Even the minimum code sucks. You'll still hear a lot of noise transfer. So there's some cost-effective ways to add additional soundproofing measures in order to try to stop the complaints about noise, if you know what I'm saying. Once we get past that, we're going to drywall, mud and tape, paint, and then we're going to install all the finishes. And that point, it's really straightforward what you need to do. When you do things in order, things go faster. But that is basically the process. Once we're done all the infos, we're going to call for a final inspection. They're going to walk through the property, and assuming it passes, then technically you have a legal duplex. A couple things that happen often is there is no paperwork when it's done. It's kind of a silly process. So they'll send the contractor say the job's done, it's passed. Okay, what's next? Well, that's it. Now this you can buy the document from the city after a few weeks. They charge you like $150 for a piece of paper. There does go into a registry you can see online, but it takes time. But that's basically the process. A few other things you got to consider is mail. Okay, so you got to make sure you have separate mailboxes, and then garbage pickup, because now you have two units and they only allowed one bag per thing. So you have to call and apply for the second bag for the property so that each tenant can put their own garbage out. It's not as simple as that project has a process I just told you, but that's a 3 months high level overview of how this process goes.
It was super informative regardless. Like, I mean, I like the idea that you touched on about bringing the BCIN or a contractor in during that inspection period, because like you mentioned, now we're having no problem getting offers accepted conditional on inspection. So we can use that week to bring somebody in to take a look at it.
Yeah.
But that was an awesome overview. I really appreciate that. In terms of the costs, say somebody just wants to do the basement, they don't want to do the full house reno.
Mhm.
What sort of estimate, like, you don't have to give an exact number, but obviously just a range because it's going to
Yep.
change depending on finishes and that sort of stuff. What would you say somebody should budget typically?
I'm going to break a lot of people's hearts here, so everybody plug their ears now. Okay. So the first one, I did my first one in 2017, and including taxes, the whole project was $77,000. Now, my cost to complete the project without any management or overhead are about 10% higher than that. So the average duplex the last couple of years. Now I'm going to speak on a typical Hamilton Mountain bungalow because that's the easiest numbers to tell you. Typically runs between 130 and 160,000 plus taxes to hire a contractor to do it. Now that doesn't include your appliances. That doesn't include all the BCN and permitting, and it doesn't include holding costs. So there is a whole bunch of things to consider. But the good news is, after all that, I've had zero people say it wasn't worth the money. But that's really, as an investor, that's your job ahead of time is to plan all that and see if it makes sense before you buy the property. Now, there's people out there that are handy enough and skillful enough to do this themselves. And what I would expect your cost to be if you do this yourself. This is what I mean by self-managing the project. Doesn't mean you're doing all the work except for some of it. I would expect you could do this for under $100,000. Here's the downside to it. If you don't have 20 to 30 hours per week for 4 to 6 months, and then don't do it. And if you have then you have to evaluate your time to see what you could do with 20 to 30 hours a week for 6 months. Would you make more money? Most of the time, the answer is yes. Just a quick tidbit. I've seen people try to do it, and it just takes forever, especially if you don't understand fire codes or soundproofing codes, because multiple inspections get through it, adds weeks, and then what would be your rent recovery and your personal time recovery to hire a contractor? Um, that's working with obviously a contractor who knows what they're doing because we've all heard those horror stories. But that's my rough ballpark on the pricing.
Okay, yeah, I think that number definitely broke some hearts. I know when I talk to people, and even because that city grant came out, I don't know if you heard about this, and
I've
they're
heard about it. Yep.
offering what $25,000
Yeah, it
to do
doesn't.
it. What are you gonna do with that?
Well, I mean, sure, 25 grand is 25 grand, don't get me
Yeah,
wrong, but like just the mechanical trades involved with these projects are 40 to $50,000. And as I said before, it is just the one thing that if you skip out on, you're going to pay for the rest of existence on the project. Over the last few years with COVID and the renovation boom, costs have skyrocketed, materials skyrocketed. Like, just here's the easiest one for me to tell you because I'm an electrician. When I was doing electrical full time myself, a coil of 150 meters of the White House wire you see in the houses cost me $99. And 2.5 years later, that same $99 is $319. Not to mention code changes. So in these duplexes, we have to do interconnected smoke detectors, and they're the special strobe ones, which I disagree with, but we won't go into that now. Each one of those is $125 plus, and you need basically nine of them to do the project. So you're talking $2,000 just to physically buy the smoke detectors, not putting on the wire. So the costs have skyrocketed. Everything's gone up, metal, wood. I mean, wood has been like a roller coaster through this thing. Right now, it's relatively stabilized, but it's still double the price it was before COVID. And so, is it the best time in construction to build these things? No, but is such demand for housing right now, and the way the rents have gone. Like, I'm not going to speak to it too quickly, but just for an example, the first duplex I did for a 2 unit conversion, the rent was something like $1,200 a month. The last one I finished, they got 22, 30, 2,300 a month. And that's in the span of 3 years, right? four
yeah,
years.
so quick.
So it's crazy.
Yeah, it's really jumped, and I think obviously you want to look at the return in investment in terms of the rent, but I also think people shouldn't sleep on the fact of the return in value when you go to sell this thing down the road. Like we were seeing it in the peak. These legal ones were going, I think we sold one in Upper Sherman. It was like 1.1 million we got for a bungalow.
I
And then the
saw the
ones that
highest one I
were
saw was 1.3.
that's nuts. And the non-legal, like the people that had the in-law, we'll call it,
Yeah,
those were going in the eights. So I
yeah.
mean, you do get the return on money by doing it because people do appreciate everything being above board with their rental, not trying to hide it from the city, keep it hush, that sort of thing. So,
hmm
uh, when you're doing these, what do you say the most common issue you run into on these projects?
Um, well, before the project starts, there's all the stuff that comes into play, like with getting the permitting. So, like, you'll see situations where, again, things have changed so much, but driveways were a huge issue for a long time now. That's getting easier. Sometimes the proximity to the neighbors for windows where you need fire shutters and all that stuff comes up. But during the actual project of construction, it mostly to do with the mechanical trades. Wiring is bad. You do need a new furnace. Hot water tanks are always an issue, and there's a long, complicated answer for that. But just make sure you pay attention to it. Underground plumbing, waterproofing. It's amazing. For the first couple of years, I've had so little issues with waterproofs. In the last couple of years, I've had so many issues with waterproofing. Now, a lot of people just started getting smart and putting in the waterproofing ahead of time, but it's a $10,000 to $15,000 investment to do an interior waterproofing. And some people that are in the long term started doing this, and it was smart of them, because there's nothing better than getting to the 90% through the project, also having a huge rainstorm and there's water in your basement. You're like, now what do we do? That's an issue. So something to really consider. And that really depends on the area you're in too, because like for example, if you're close to the mountain on Hamilton Mountain, there it's all shale, so you can't do an exterior. It never had a weeping tile, and little things like that. Another thing that's comes to mind that I just realized is that water line sizing. So typically these homes were built with half-inch water supplies. Well, the city won't accept that anymore. To get a permit, you're going to need to upgrade to about 3/4 or bigger. And most of the time, because 3/4 and 1 inch are the same price, it's just easier to do 1 inch. Separating utilities is always an interesting question. There's many points to it. I'm a big fan of separating utilities, especially the electrical, and that's not because I'm an electrician, because hydro is the easiest one to abuse. I've seen like $400 or $500 a month bills coming from a basement because they left on a space heater all the time, things like that. And so those are conversations you want to have ahead of time, whether they're worth it. Is it available to do? Um, Here's as an electrician, we're doing the biggest duplex conversion we ever done in off of Green Hill, and the house is an underground hydro service and only has 100 amps available. Now you can't legally use 100 amps to do a duplex with 2 stoves and 2 dryers, so we have to switch to gas appliances there, and there's only way around it. To upgrade that house to 200 amps that we need would have cost something like $50,000 off the front because this the silly. So it's like this is why you need experts on your team, because if we wouldn't have noticed that to the end, there'd be a big problem here. And that's why it's always good to have, a good set of power team. It's always good to have an electrician to call, a plumber to call, an HVAC guy to call, just to see what you're dealing with. But those are the most common issues.
That's it. You're always my guy to call. I'm always bugging you, but you respond quick. I appreciate it. But
Just for you, don't tell everybody else that.
yeah, that's it. The waterproofing's a big one. Like talking on that, because in my experience, when I'm selling a lot of these homes, especially on the Hamilton Mountain with these old block foundations and stuff, it's almost not if they're gonna leak. It's like this thing's gonna leak eventually, right? So if you're
Yeah,
spending that money, I agree, for an extra 10, 15,000 just to give you that security on it, it's absolutely worth it.
yeah,
So
for sure.
all right. Well, that's pretty much all the questions I had for you. I don't know if there's anything else to add. You covered everything. I really, really appreciate you jumping on today to do this interview. I get a ton of questions about this stuff, so I figured I'm just going to go to the man himself, get the answers.
I
So
appreciate it, my friend.
that's it. Thanks again, John, for joining us. And everybody, thanks again for joining us this week. I really appreciate it. If you like the content you heard today, be sure to pop a like on it and be sure to subscribe if you haven't already joined our growing community. Anyways, thanks for tuning in, and I'll talk to you again next week.